The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD is widely regarded as the definitive starting point of the European Middle Ages. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer ended centuries of Roman political dominance in the West. By this time, the Western Roman Empire had already been weakened by decades of internal instability, economic decline, and repeated invasions by Germanic tribes such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths. The administrative infrastructure of the Western Empire, its tax system, road networks, and provincial governance, had largely collapsed, leaving regional powers to assume authority. In the absence of a central authority, Europe entered a period of political fragmentation and decentralization. Barbarian kingdoms quickly filled the power vacuum in Western Europe. In Italy, the Ostrogoths, under King Theodoric the Great, established a kingdom that preserved much of the Roman administrative framework while imposing Gothic military and legal dominance. Theodoric ruled from 493 to 526 AD and maintained a relatively stable society, balancing Gothic and Roman populations and preserving Roman law, infrastructure, and culture. In the Iberian Peninsula, the Visigoths established their own kingdom in what is now Spain, with Toledo as their capital. The Visigothic kingdom sought to maintain Roman administrative practices while gradually integrating Germanic traditions. In Gaul, modern-day France, the Franks, a Germanic people, expanded their control, gradually laying the foundations for what would become the Frankish Empire. In northern Italy, the Lombards arrived in 568 AD, carving out territories that would remain politically fragmented for centuries. These kingdoms were characterized by a mix of Roman administrative structures, Germanic tribal law, and localized military rule, representing the hybrid nature of early medieval governance. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople and often called the Byzantine Empire by modern historians, survived as a continuation of Roman traditions. Under Emperor Zeno and his successors, the Byzantines maintained a complex bureaucratic system, collected taxes, preserved Roman law, and projected military power in the Eastern Mediterranean. Emperor Justinian I, 527 to 565 AD, undertook extensive campaigns to reclaim lost territories in the West, temporarily restoring parts of Italy, North Africa, and southern Spain to imperial control. Justinian also codified Roman law in the Corpus Juris Civilis, which later influenced European legal systems for centuries. The Eastern Empire retained the cultural, architectural, and administrative legacy of Rome, serving as a model for order and governance while the West fragmented. During this period, the Christian Church became the primary unifying institution across Western Europe. With secular authority in decline, the Church assumed responsibilities that were previously under imperial control, including administration, welfare, and education. Bishops and abbots became local leaders, overseeing communities, resolving disputes, and maintaining social cohesion. Missionary activity, led by figures such as St. Patrick in Ireland and St. Augustine of Canterbury in England, spread Christianity across pagan territories. The Church preserved literacy and classical knowledge through monastic centers, most notably the Benedictine monasteries established after Saint Benedict of Nursia, c. 480 to 547 AD, introduced the Benedictine rule. These monasteries maintained libraries, copied manuscripts, taught reading and writing, and provided stability in regions plagued by conflict. The social and economic structures of the early medieval West were increasingly defined by feudal arrangements. As the centralized authority disappeared, local lords gained power by offering protection to peasants in exchange for labor, goods, or military service. This system, known as feudalism, created a hierarchy in which kings, nobles, and knights held land in return for loyalty and service, while peasants and serfs worked the land. Manorial estates became the primary economic units, largely self-sufficient, producing food, textiles, and goods for local consumption. Lords administered justice within their domains, collecting rents, overseeing agricultural production, and organizing defense. The early feudal system laid the foundations for social, economic, and political relationships that would dominate Europe for centuries. This period also witnessed significant demographic and cultural shifts. With urban centers declining after the collapse of Roman authority, populations moved to rural estates or fortified settlements. Roman infrastructure, including roads, aqueducts, and public buildings, deteriorated in the West, though Byzantine regions maintained more sophisticated networks. Trade declined sharply, particularly long-distance commerce, though local markets persisted, connecting villages to regional centers. Military threats, including raids by Vandals, Lombards, and Slavs, encouraged the construction of fortifications, castles, and walled towns. Cultural life became heavily intertwined with religious institutions, with Latin serving as the language of literacy, administration, and worship. Pagan traditions gradually gave way to Christian practices, though syncretism persisted in rural areas for centuries. By the end of the 6th century, Europe had become a patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, and tribal territories, each governed by a mixture of Roman traditions and Germanic customs. While the West struggled with fragmentation and limited economic recovery, the Byzantine Empire in the East provided a continuous model of imperial governance, law, and culture. The Church maintained social cohesion, literacy, and religious continuity across regions with no central government. Feudal structures, monasteries, and emerging local authorities established the social and political foundations of what would become medieval Europe. Following the fragmentation of Western Europe in the late 5th century, the former Roman territories gradually coalesced under the authority of emerging Germanic kingdoms. Among these, the Frankish kingdom, established in the region corresponding largely to modern France and Western Germany, became the dominant political power. The Merovingian dynasty, beginning with Clovis I.C. 466 to 511 AD, consolidated Frankish rule, expanded territory through conquest, and, by converting to Christianity around 496 AD, secured the support of the Gallo-Roman population and the ecclesiastical hierarchy. Clovis' conversion established a precedent in which the Frankish kings were closely aligned with the Catholic Church, providing legitimacy for royal authority through religious sanction. This integration of secular and ecclesiastical power became a defining feature of European monarchies during the early Middle Ages. The later Merovingian period saw a decline in central royal authority, leading to the rise of powerful mayors of the palace, regional officials who managed administrative and military responsibilities. The most significant of these was Charles Martel, c. 688 to 741 AD, who, though not king, held effective control over the Frankish realms. His military campaigns, particularly the Battle of Tours in 732 AD, halted the northward expansion of Islamic forces from the Iberian Peninsula. This victory reinforced the position of the Frankish leaders as defenders of Christian Europe and laid the groundwork for the future consolidation of royal authority. The ascendancy of the Carolingian dynasty began with Pepin the Short, 714 to 768 AD, son of Charles Martel. Pepin secured papal approval for his kingship, formally replacing the Merovingians in 751 AD, establishing a precedent in which the papacy could legitimize secular rule. This collaboration between the Frankish monarchy and the papacy reflected the broader integration of religious and political authority that characterized the Carolingian era. Pepin's campaigns in southern Gaul and against the Lombards in Italy expanded Frankish influence and secured key territories, strengthening the kingdom's position as the preeminent power in Western Europe. The most significant figure of this period was Charlemagne, c. 742 to 814 AD, also known as Charles the Great. Charlemagne succeeded his father Pepin in 768 AD and, over the next several decades, expanded Frankish control across much of Western and Central Europe. His military campaigns incorporated regions that include modern France, Germany, northern Italy, the Low Countries, and parts of Central and Eastern Europe. Charlemagne's strategy combined direct conquest, strategic alliances with regional leaders, and the incorporation of local elites into the Frankish administrative system. By the end of his reign, Charlemagne had established the largest political entity in Western Europe since the fall of Rome, often referred to as the Carolingian Empire. In 800 AD, Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans by Charlemagne implemented significant administrative reforms to manage his extensive empire. The empire was divided into counties, each overseen by a count responsible for judicial, military, and fiscal duties. To ensure oversight and reduce corruption, Charlemagne appointed missi dominici, royal envoys who traveled throughout the empire to supervise counts and report directly to the emperor. This administrative structure created a balance between local authority and central oversight, allowing the Carolingian state to maintain control over a vast and diverse territory. The codification of laws and the issuance of capitularies, which served as legal edicts, further standardized governance and reflected a continuation of Roman legal traditions adapted to a Germanic social framework. The Carolingian era was also marked by significant religious and cultural developments. Charlemagne and his advisors recognized the importance of Christianity as a unifying force across the empire. Missionary activity was promoted in regions such as Saxony, Bavaria, and the Slavic territories east of the Elbe River, often accompanied by military campaigns to enforce conversion and integrate these regions into the imperial structure. Monasteries became centers of learning, literacy, and manuscript preservation, contributing to what historians now term the Carolingian Renaissance. This intellectual revival involved the copying of classical texts, the reform of liturgical practices, and the promotion of literacy among the clergy and administrative officials. Charlemagne invited scholars from across Europe, including Alcuin of York, to develop educational curricula and establish schools at monasteries and cathedrals, ensuring a cadre of literate administrators to support the empire. Economically, the Carolingian Empire relied on a predominantly agrarian system, with production centered on estates managed by local lords and monasteries. Coinage was standardized under Charlemagne, and trade networks, though limited compared to Roman times, connected regions across the empire and beyond, facilitating the movement of goods such as grain, wine, wool, and metalwork. Markets and fairs became increasingly important, providing hubs for commercial activity that would later expand in the High Middle Ages. Despite the agrarian focus, the Carolingian state maintained substantial infrastructure for administration and military mobilization, including road networks, fortified sites, and logistical support for armies. Military organization under Charlemagne combined traditional Frankish cavalry with levied infantry drawn from local populations. The retinues of nobles provided professional soldiers, while free peasants and dependent populations were obligated to serve in times of war. Fortifications, including castles and fortified towns, protected strategic locations and reinforced imperial authority. The Carolingian military campaigns, though expansive, were often designed to integrate conquered territories through both coercion and negotiation, ensuring that local elites were incorporated into the governance structure rather than entirely displaced. External pressures shaped the later stages of the Carolingian Empire. Viking incursions from Scandinavia began in the late 8th century, targeting coastal settlements, monasteries, and riverside towns. Viking raids disrupted trade, challenged local authorities, and necessitated the construction of defensive works throughout the northwestern regions of the empire. Similarly, Muslim forces from Al-Andalus conducted raids along the southern coasts of France and the Mediterranean. Charlemagne and his successors responded with military campaigns and fortified settlements, gradually incorporating defense against these external threats into imperial strategy. The combination of expansion, defense, and administrative reform allowed the Carolingians to maintain a level of cohesion unprecedented in Western Europe since the fall of Rome. Despite these accomplishments, the Carolingian Empire faced structural challenges that would affect its long-term stability. Charlemagne's sons and grandsons inherited divisions of the empire under the Treaty of Verdun, 843 AD, which partitioned the territory into East Francia, West Francia, and Middle Francia. This fragmentation weakened centralized authority and exposed regions to external threats, including continued Viking raids, Magyar invasions from the east, and Muslim incursions from the south. Local lords and counts increasingly exercised autonomous power, reflecting the gradual decentralization of political authority that would define the subsequent feudal period. The partitioning of the empire also created linguistic, cultural, and political divisions that would influence the development of future European states, including France, Germany, and the Low Countries. Religiously, the Carolingian era reinforced the dominance of the Catholic Church across Europe. Charlemagne's alliance with the papacy ensured that bishops and abbots held significant influence in local governance and education. Monasteries continued to serve as centers of literacy, manuscript production, and theological study, preserving knowledge from the classical world while fostering the development of new intellectual traditions. Church councils and synods codified ecclesiastical law, regulated clerical behavior, and addressed heretical movements, contributing to the standardization of religious practice. The integration of religious authority with secular power created a model in which kingship and Christianity were mutually reinforcing institutions. The Carolingian period also saw demographic and settlement changes. Population recovery following the crises of the 6th and early 7th centuries allowed for the expansion of cultivated land, particularly in regions with fertile soil such as the Loire Valley, the Rhine Basin, and parts of northern Italy. Agricultural innovation included the introduction of the heavy plow, three-field crop rotation, and improved harnessing techniques for draft animals, increasing productivity and supporting population growth. Rural settlements remained the primary organizational units, but fortified towns and episcopal centers began to emerge as hubs of administration and trade, laying the groundwork for urban development in later centuries. Culturally, the Carolingian Renaissance established a framework for artistic and intellectual activity that influenced subsequent periods. Manuscript illumination, religious iconography, liturgical music, and architectural projects, including the construction and renovation of churches and palaces, reflected a synthesis of Roman, Germanic, and Christian traditions. Charlemagne's court at Aachen became a symbolic center of learning and culture, attracting scholars from across Europe. Standardization of the Latin script, later known as Caroline minuscule, improved legibility and consistency in administrative and religious texts, facilitating communication across the empire and the preservation of knowledge for future generations. By 900 AD, the European political landscape had evolved into a complex tapestry of regional powers. The Carolingian Empire, while fragmented, had established models of governance, administration, military organization, and cultural patronage that influenced successor states. The integration of secular authority with ecclesiastical structures, the promotion of literacy and education, and the consolidation of territories under centralized rule set precedents for the High Middle Ages. Local lords and regional rulers operated within frameworks initially defined by the Carolingians, balancing autonomy with loyalty to overarching political and religious authority. Trade and economic activity remained localized, but showed signs of recovery from the disruptions of the 5th and 6th centuries. River routes, including the Rhine, Seine, and Danube, facilitated the movement of goods, while coastal settlements engaged in maritime commerce with the British Isles, Scandinavia, and the Mediterranean. Markets provided venues for the exchange of grain, livestock, textiles, metalwork, and luxury items, and fairs became periodic centers of regional trade. Currency remained relatively scarce in rural areas, with transactions often conducted in kind, but Carolingian coinage standardized monetary exchange in urban centers and for administrative purposes. By the beginning of the 10th century, Western Europe had undergone substantial political, social, and economic transformation following the fragmentation of the Carolingian Empire. The Treaty of Verdun in 843 AD, which divided Charlemagne's empire into East Francia, West Francia, and Middle Francia, had created distinct territorial entities, each governed by regional rulers. Over time, the central authority weakened as local lords and counts gained de facto control over their territories, setting the stage for the development of feudal society. Political power became decentralized, with authority resting in the hands of landholding nobles who exercised jurisdiction over smaller domains, maintained armed forces, and extracted resources from dependent populations. The weakening of centralized structures was compounded by ongoing external pressures, including Viking raids from the north, Magyar incursions from the east, and Muslim attacks along the southern Mediterranean coast, which reinforced the need for localized defense and governance. The defining feature of this period was feudalism, a hierarchical system in which land, military service, and loyalty were interconnected. The basic unit of this system was the fief, a parcel of land granted by a lord to a vassal in exchange for military service and counsel. Lords protected their vassals, and these arrangements extended from kings and major nobles to minor lords and knights, forming a network of reciprocal obligations that structured both political and military organization. Feudal law, often codified locally but informed by Roman and Germanic traditions, regulated disputes over land, inheritance, and duties between lords and vassals, providing a framework for order in an otherwise fragmented political landscape. Within the feudal framework, manorialism emerged as the dominant economic system. Manors, often consisting of hundreds of acres, were self-sufficient units managed by lords and worked by peasants, free and unfree. The majority of peasants were serfs, legally bound to the land, who provided labor in exchange for protection and access to plots for subsistence farming. Agricultural production focused on grains such as wheat, rye, and barley, as well as livestock, including cattle, pigs, and sheep. Technological improvements, including the widespread use of the heavy plow, the horse collar, and a rudimentary three-field crop rotation, gradually increased productivity. Surplus production supported local markets, trade in towns, and the sustenance of the noble and ecclesiastical elite. Manorial courts administered local justice, regulating the obligations of peasants, resolving disputes, and maintaining social order, while lords collected rents, tithes, and other forms of tribute, which constituted the economic foundation of feudal authority. The social hierarchy of the period extended beyond lords and peasants to include a warrior class, clerics, and urban populations. Knights, initially mounted retainers of noble households, became formalized military units by the 10th century, trained in cavalry tactics, siegecraft, and arms management. Training typically began in adolescence, often within a lord's household or under the supervision of an experienced knight. Knights were obligated to serve their lord in military campaigns and, increasingly, to uphold codes of conduct governing loyalty, martial skill, and service. Fortifications, including stone and timber castles, reinforced the authority of lords and provided defensive strongpoints against raiders and rival nobles. Strategic locations such as river crossings, hilltops, and trade routes were heavily fortified, serving both military and administrative functions. The church remained a central institution in medieval society, providing spiritual authority, education, and administrative continuity. Bishops, abbots, and abbesses exercised jurisdiction over ecclesiastical lands, collected tithes, and maintained schools and hospitals. Monasteries continued to preserve literacy, copy manuscripts, and transmit knowledge from classical antiquity. Notable monastic orders during this period included the Benedictines, whose rule provided detailed instructions for communal life, labor, and worship, and the Cluniac reforms, which emphasized stricter adherence to monastic discipline and centralized supervision. The church's influence extended into secular governance, with bishops and abbots often serving as royal advisors, judges, and administrators, reinforcing the integration of religious and political authority characteristic of the feudal era. Education and intellectual activity were largely concentrated within the church. Monastic schools provided instruction in Latin literacy, theology, and basic arithmetic, preparing future clergy and administrators. While literacy among the general population remained limited, these institutions ensured that bureaucratic, liturgical, and legal documents could be produced and preserved. The Carolingian Renaissance of the previous century had established standardized script, codified law, and promoted scholarly activity, which persisted into the 10th and 11th centuries. Religious instruction, including sermons, catechism, and moral regulation, reinforced societal norms, while church councils and synods codified rules of conduct, sacramental practice, and clerical behavior across regions, maintaining cohesion within an otherwise fragmented Europe. Political structures varied regionally. In England, following the collapse of Roman authority and subsequent Anglo-Saxon settlement, multiple kingdoms emerged, including Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria, which competed for dominance. By the late 9th century, Wessex under Alfred the Great, 871 to 899 AD, consolidated control over southern England and resisted Viking incursions, instituting administrative reforms, fortifications, and a network of fortified towns. Alfred promoted education, legal codification, and the translation of Latin texts into vernacular Anglo-Saxon, laying the groundwork for centralized governance. In France, West Francia evolved under counts and dukes who gradually consolidated territories, often acting independently of the weakened Carolingian monarchy. East Francia, corresponding roughly to modern Germany, was similarly fragmented into duchies such as Saxony, Bavaria, and Franconia, which maintained local armies, courts, and fiscal authority while acknowledging nominal royal oversight. Military organization was a central concern throughout the period due to external pressures. Viking raids intensified in the 9th and 10th centuries, targeting monasteries, towns, and riverside settlements from Scandinavia. Raids prompted the construction of defensive fortifications, the development of local militias, and the adaptation of naval strategies. In addition, Magyar raids from the east and Muslim incursions from the Mediterranean coast posed intermittent threats, requiring coordination between local lords, regional rulers, and emerging monarchs. The military obligation of vassals and the presence of fortified manors and castles ensured that local communities could respond to these threats, contributing to the stability of feudal structures despite external pressures. Urban life remained limited but experienced gradual growth. Towns often developed around cathedral centers, monastic institutions, or fortified castles, serving as hubs of trade and administration. Markets and fairs provided venues for the exchange of agricultural products, textiles, metalwork, and imported luxury goods such as spices, silk, and wine. Merchant classes emerged in limited numbers, linking rural production to regional and, in some cases, international trade networks, including the North Sea, the Mediterranean, and the Baltic. Although trade did not reach the scale of the Roman period, the establishment of these urban centers provided a foundation for the economic expansion of the High Middle Ages. Demographically, Europe saw population recovery and gradual expansion of cultivated land after the disruptions of the 6th and 7th centuries, including pandemics, invasions, and famines. Rivers, valleys, and fertile plains supported concentrated settlement, while forests, marshes, and marginal lands were cleared progressively for agriculture. Settlement patterns were influenced by topography, water access, and security considerations, leading to a combination of dispersed rural villages, fortified towns, and episcopal centers. Population pressures and resource distribution influenced the development of feudal obligations, labor practices, and local governance. Legal and administrative practices during this period reflected the synthesis of Roman, Germanic, and ecclesiastical traditions. Local courts adjudicated disputes over land, inheritance, and feudal obligations, while the church maintained ecclesiastical courts to regulate moral behavior, clerical conduct, and religious practice. The codification of customary law in various regions, including the Salic law among the Franks and Anglo-Saxon legal codes in England, provided structured mechanisms for dispute resolution, ensuring continuity of authority in the absence of strong central governance. Legal procedures emphasized oaths, witness testimony, and community enforcement, reinforcing social cohesion and accountability within feudal hierarchies. Cultural developments during the 10th and 11th centuries were closely tied to religious and aristocratic institutions. Church architecture evolved, transitioning from wooden structures to stone churches with Romanesque elements such as rounded arches, thick walls, and decorative sculpture. Liturgical music and religious art flourished, including the production of illuminated manuscripts and reliquaries. Monastic scriptoria maintained classical and religious texts, copying works of Latin literature, law, and theological commentary. These intellectual and cultural practices ensured the transmission of knowledge from earlier periods while creating new forms of artistic and scholarly expression within the constraints of feudal society. By the end of the 11th century, feudal society was firmly established as the defining social, political, and economic system in Western Europe. Regional monarchs and lords exercised authority over territories, defended their domains against internal and external threats, and maintained networks of vassalage and obligation. The church provided spiritual guidance, administrative continuity, and cultural leadership, integrating religious and secular life. Agricultural production, technological innovation, and localized markets supported population growth and social stability. Castles, fortified towns, and episcopal centers reinforced political control, while education, literacy, and intellectual activity within monastic institutions preserved and transmitted knowledge. This period laid the structural and cultural foundations for the High Middle Ages, enabling subsequent economic expansion, urbanization, and centralized governance. The combination of decentralized political authority, hierarchical social structures, manorial economies, and ecclesiastical influence defined Europe from 900 to 1100 AD. Feudal intellectual and cultural practices persisted through monastic and cathedral schools, preserving classical knowledge, developing literacy, and promoting the standardization of religious and administrative texts. Settlement patterns, agricultural innovation, and fortification construction reinforced the structural stability of feudal society, ensuring continuity across generations. The period between 1100 and 1250 AD represents the High Middle Ages, a time of sustained economic, demographic, political, and cultural expansion in Europe. Following the decentralization of the early medieval period, European societies began to consolidate under stronger monarchies, regional rulers, and ecclesiastical institutions. Political structures became more sophisticated, while urban centers, trade networks, and cultural institutions expanded in scale and complexity. This period marked a significant transformation from the rural, fragmented societies of the 10th and early 11th centuries to a more interconnected, economically and politically dynamic Europe. Population growth was a defining feature of this era. Estimates indicate that Europe's population roughly doubled between 1000 and 1300 AD, increasing from approximately 36 million to 70 to 80 million people. The recovery from earlier famines, epidemics, and invasions allowed settlements to expand, with previously marginal lands brought under cultivation. Agricultural technology improved through the adoption of the heavy plow, the three-field crop rotation system, watermills, and horse harnesses, enabling higher yields and surplus production. These innovations increased the stability of rural economies, supported population growth, and provided the resources necessary for the expansion of towns and markets. Feudal structures continued to organize social and political life, but monarchical power strengthened in multiple regions. In England, the Norman conquest of 1066 had established a centralized monarchy under William the Conqueror, and by the 12th century, kings such as Henry I and Henry II implemented administrative reforms, including the development of royal courts, standardized law codes, and systems of taxation that strengthened centralized authority. France evolved under the Capetian dynasty, which gradually expanded royal control over fragmented fiefs. By employing alliances, inheritance claims, and military action, Capetian kings consolidated authority over territories such as the Isle de France, creating a foundation for the development of a centralized French state. Similarly, the Holy Roman Empire, encompassing much of Central Europe, maintained a complex balance between imperial authority and powerful regional princes, with emperors such as Frederick I Barbarossa working to assert control over duchies while relying on vassal loyalty. Military organization advanced alongside political consolidation. Knights and mounted cavalry remained central to European warfare, with training and equipment becoming more standardized. Castles and fortified towns proliferated as both defensive structures and symbols of authority. Military obligations inherited from feudal relationships were supplemented by professional forces in some regions, and the need for coordinated defense against external threats such as pagan Slavs in the east or Muslim forces in the Mediterranean prompted innovations in fortification design and strategic deployment. Siege engines, crossbows, and early forms of artillery began to play an increasingly significant role in warfare, influencing both offensive and defensive tactics. Urban centers expanded significantly during this period. Towns developed around cathedral chapters, monastic institutions, trade routes, and river crossings. Cities such as Paris, London, Venice, and Florence emerged as hubs of commerce, administration, and craft production. Markets and fairs allowed for the exchange of grain, livestock, textiles, metals, and luxury items such as spices, silk, and wine. Merchant and artisan classes became increasingly organized, forming guilds to regulate trade, maintain quality standards, and protect economic interests. The growth of towns contributed to social mobility, enabling the accumulation of wealth independent of feudal landholdings, and served as centers for administrative and legal authority in both secular and ecclesiastical contexts. The Crusades, beginning in 1096 and continuing in successive campaigns until 1291, had a profound influence on political, economic, and cultural developments. Initiated in response to papal calls to recapture the Holy Land from Muslim control, the First Crusade resulted in the establishment of Crusader states such as the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Edessa. These campaigns mobilized large segments of European nobility, creating networks of military, logistical, and religious cooperation across regions. Crusading activity facilitated the transmission of knowledge, trade goods, and technologies between Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean. Contact with Byzantine and Islamic societies introduced Europeans to advanced techniques in architecture, medicine, mathematics, navigation, and agriculture, contributing to the broader intellectual and cultural growth of the period. Monasticism and religious institutions remained central to societal organization and cultural development. The Benedictine and Cistercian orders continued to dominate monastic life, emphasizing agricultural productivity, education, and manuscript preservation. Cistercian monasteries, in particular, played a role in the introduction of advanced farming techniques, including water management and improved plowing methods, which further supported population growth and urbanization. Cathedral schools, emerging in major episcopal centers, provided education in theology, Latin literacy, and administrative skills, laying the groundwork for the development of medieval universities. By the mid-12th century, institutions in Bologna, Paris, and Oxford had begun to formalize curricula in law, philosophy, medicine, and theology, reflecting the integration of intellectual and professional training into urban life. Architecture evolved in both religious and secular contexts during this period. Romanesque styles, characterized by rounded arches, thick walls, and small windows, dominated early in the century. By the late 12th and early 13th centuries, Gothic architecture emerged, distinguished by pointed arches, ribbed vaults, flying buttresses, and large stained glass windows. Iconic cathedrals such as Chartres, Notre Dame de Paris, and Amiens reflected advances in engineering, religious devotion, and artistic ambition. These structures served as centers for liturgical practice, social gathering, and cultural expression, demonstrating the integration of religious, civic, and artistic life. Secular architecture, including castles, town halls, and fortifications, continued to evolve in response to military, administrative, and social needs. Trade and commerce experienced significant expansion during the High Middle Ages. The revival of long-distance trade connected northern and southern Europe, linking regions across the Mediterranean, North Sea, and Baltic. Italian city-states, including Venice, Genoa, and Pisa, established extensive maritime networks, facilitating the import and export of goods such as spices, silk, salt, and precious metals. In Northern Europe, the Hanseatic League, a confederation of merchant guilds and towns in the Baltic and North Sea regions, organized trade and regulated commerce, providing stability and infrastructure for merchants. Markets, fairs, and trade routes fostered the development of money economies, the circulation of coinage, and banking mechanisms, gradually reducing reliance on barter in commercial transactions. Legal and administrative structures continued to advance during this period. Monarchs and regional rulers sought to standardize law and administration within their domains. In England, Henry II, 1154 to 1189 AD, implemented legal reforms, including the development of common law, royal courts, and itinerant justices, creating a system that reinforced centralized authority while regulating disputes over land, contracts, and criminal offenses. In France, Capetian kings established coutumes or customary laws in different provinces, while issuing royal decrees and judgments to consolidate power over local lords. In the Holy Roman Empire, emperors balanced authority with the autonomy of regional princes, maintaining imperial courts and legal oversight over disputes involving vassals and ecclesiastical institutions. Church law, or canon law, developed in parallel, regulating ecclesiastical administration, clerical conduct, and moral practice, providing a framework for social and religious regulation. Intellectual and cultural life expanded significantly during the High Middle Ages. Scholasticism emerged by the mid-13th century. Europe had become a more interconnected and dynamic continent than in previous centuries. Political consolidation, the expansion of monarchies, and the integration of local and regional authorities strengthened governance. Economic growth, driven by agricultural productivity, urban expansion, and long-distance trade, supported population increases and social mobility. Religious institutions maintained cohesion, provided education, and contributed to cultural development, while intellectual activity and scholastic inquiry prepared the foundation for future scientific and philosophical advancement. Military organization and fortifications ensured defense against both internal and external threats, while the codification of law and administration standardized governance across regions. The High Middle Ages established a framework for political, social, economic, and cultural development that would influence Europe into the late Middle Ages and beyond. Demographically, the period saw migration patterns that affected settlement, land use, and cultural exchange. Populations expanded in Northern and Western Europe, particularly in the fertile plains of France, Germany, and England, while frontier areas in Eastern Europe experienced colonization and agricultural development. The settlement of previously forested or marshy regions increased arable land, supported population growth, and facilitated the establishment of new towns and villages. Social structures adapted to these demographic pressures, with lords regulating tenancy, labor obligations, and resource distribution to ensure the productivity and stability of their domains. The integration of Europe into broader economic networks included contact with the Mediterranean, the Near East, and North Africa. The Crusades, maritime trade, and pilgrimage routes facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. The transmission of scientific knowledge from the Islamic world, including advancements in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering, influenced European intellectual development. Architectural techniques, military engineering, and agricultural methods also reflected these cross-cultural interactions, demonstrating the increasing interconnectedness of Europe during the High Middle Ages. By the mid-13th century, Europe had undergone substantial growth and consolidation during the High Middle Ages, yet the period between 1250 and 1350 marked a turning point in political, social, and economic conditions. Demographic expansion, economic complexity, and centralized monarchies were increasingly challenged by environmental stress, disease, social unrest, and shifting political dynamics. This century represents a period of crisis and transformation that reshaped European society, undermining older feudal structures and preparing the continent for the developments of the late Middle Ages. Population levels had expanded significantly since 1000 AD, driven by improvements in agriculture, trade, and settlement expansion. Estimates suggest Europe's population reached approximately 70 to 80 million by 1300. This demographic growth exerted pressure on arable land, food production, and resource distribution. Settlement extended into marginal lands, including forested areas, wetlands, and uplands, with new villages, farms, and towns established under the authority of local lords or monastic institutions. While this expansion supported short-term population growth, it created vulnerabilities. Soil exhaustion, deforestation, and localized famine increased the susceptibility of communities to environmental fluctuations, economic instability, and disease. Agricultural practices continued to improve during this period, but productivity remained dependent on climatic conditions and labor availability. The introduction of the three-field rotation system, improved plowing methods, and enhanced animal husbandry allowed for higher yields, yet the capacity to sustain the growing population was uneven across regions. The northwestern plains of France, England, and the Low Countries experienced relative stability and surplus production, whereas southern Europe, parts of Italy, and the Iberian Peninsula faced recurring droughts, uneven rainfall, and soil depletion, resulting in periodic food shortages. Land management increasingly relied on lords, who enforced labor obligations, rents, and tithes to extract productivity from peasants, while monasteries also contributed to agricultural innovation through systematic land clearance and water management. Economic structures continued to evolve. The growth of towns, markets, and fairs during the previous century facilitated regional trade and the emergence of merchant classes. Northern Italian city-states such as Venice, Genoa, and Florence expanded trade networks into the Mediterranean, while the Hanseatic League consolidated commerce across the North and Baltic Seas. Urban centers developed local governance structures, including councils, guilds, and legal charters, providing regulation for crafts, trade, and commercial disputes. The use of coinage became increasingly widespread, although barter persisted in rural areas. Banking and credit mechanisms, particularly in Italian cities, enabled merchants to conduct long-distance trade efficiently, linking Europe to the economic networks of the Middle East, North Africa, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Despite economic progress, this period witnessed multiple crises that undermined the stability of medieval society. Famine occurred repeatedly, the most notable between 1315 and 1317, when widespread crop failures in northern Europe caused mass starvation. Climatic conditions, including colder temperatures, excessive rainfall, and short growing seasons, contributed to these famines. Grain shortages affected urban and rural populations, resulting in increased mortality, reduced labor productivity, and social tension. The inability of feudal lords, monarchies, or urban authorities to mitigate the effects of environmental stress highlighted vulnerabilities within the existing social and political structures. Labor relations during this period were shaped by demographic pressures and economic conditions. The majority of the European population remained rural, consisting of peasants, serfs, and tenant farmers. Feudal obligations required peasants to provide labor, rent, or produce to their lords, who in turn offered protection and access to land. In some regions, population growth led to increased fragmentation of holdings, reduced subsistence security, and pressure on communal resources. Tensions occasionally erupted into peasant revolts, reflecting grievances over excessive taxation, labor obligations, and land rights. Local lords relied on manorial courts to regulate disputes, enforce obligations, and maintain authority, but the growing economic leverage of peasants and urban workers slowly began to shift the balance of power within rural economies. Political structures experienced both consolidation and fragmentation. Monarchies in England, France, and parts of the Holy Roman Empire strengthened authority, centralizing taxation, legal administration, and military organization. In England, The Plantagenet monarchy sought to maintain control over both domestic and continental territories, relying on royal courts, itinerant justices, and fiscal reforms. France under the Capetian kings expanded royal influence over increasingly autonomous nobles, using a combination of military force, inheritance claims, and administrative reforms. In the Holy Roman Empire, emperors continued to negotiate authority with regional princes, bishops, and urban centers, resulting in a complex, decentralized political landscape that combined local autonomy with nominal imperial oversight. These structures, while more centralized than in the previous century, remained vulnerable to social and economic pressures, external threats, and internal disputes. Military organization and conflict persisted throughout this period. European warfare involved both feudal levies and increasingly professional forces. Castles, fortified towns, and city walls reinforced defensive capacity, while knights and mounted cavalry remained central to battlefield tactics. Military technology evolved with the development of crossbows, early cannons, and advanced siege engines, which altered the dynamics of warfare and siegecraft. Localized conflicts between lords, territorial disputes, and regional power struggles occurred alongside broader campaigns, including the Reconquista in the Iberian Peninsula and continued engagements with pagan and Muslim forces in Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean. Military obligations were a defining feature of feudal relationships, and the mobilization of forces reinforced the interdependence of political, economic, and social structures. Religion and ecclesiastical institutions maintained a central role in society. The Catholic Church regulated spiritual practice, moral behavior, and educational activity. Monastic orders such as the Benedictines, Cistercians, and Augustinians continued to manage agricultural estates, provide education, and maintain networks of manuscript preservation. Cathedral schools and monastic centers remained hubs of learning, training clergy, administrators, and professionals for service in both religious and secular spheres. The Church also exercised judicial authority, resolving disputes, regulating clerical conduct, and adjudicating matters of canon law. Ecclesiastical influence extended to both local and regional governance, reinforcing hierarchical social structures and providing a measure of continuity during periods of economic and demographic stress. Cultural life experienced continuity and adaptation during this period. Romanesque architecture remained prominent, characterized by massive walls, rounded arches, and decorative sculptural programs. By the early 13th century, Gothic architecture emerged and expanded rapidly, particularly in northern France and the Low Countries, incorporating pointed arches, ribbed vaulting. Urban populations increased during this period, contributing to social and economic transformation. Towns attracted craftsmen, merchants, and laborers, facilitating specialization, trade, and the formation of guilds. Guilds regulated production standards, apprenticeship systems, and the rights of members, providing a structured framework for economic activity within urban centers. Market towns became focal points for regional trade, taxation, and administrative control, linking rural production with broader networks of exchange. The expansion of urban centers contributed to social mobility, as individuals could accumulate wealth and influence independent of feudal landholdings, gradually challenging the rigid hierarchies of rural society. The period also witnessed a growing tension between established authority and social pressures. Peasant revolts, such as localized uprisings in France, England, and Flanders reflected grievances over taxation, labor obligations, and land tenure. Urban unrest occasionally accompanied these rural challenges, with artisan and merchant populations asserting rights over trade regulations, taxation, and civic administration. Local and regional authorities responded through a combination of negotiation, legal codification, and military suppression, demonstrating the interdependence of social, economic, and political structures. These tensions, while disruptive, also contributed to the gradual weakening of feudal hierarchies and the emergence of more flexible governance models. By the 14th century, the first major biological crises began to affect European society. The Black Death, which reached Europe in 1347, would have profound consequences on population, labor, and economic structures, although its immediate impact falls just beyond the period 1250 to 1350. Nevertheless, demographic stress, recurring famine, and local epidemics in the preceding decades created conditions of vulnerability that would amplify the effects of later pandemics. Mortality from disease, combined with labor shortages, increased the bargaining power of peasants and urban workers, gradually undermining traditional obligations and accelerating the transformation of European society. Political developments during this period included the continued evolution of monarchies and regional powers. In England, the signing of the Magna Carta in 1215, although predating the primary period under consideration, established principles of legal accountability and limitations on royal authority that influenced subsequent governance. In France, Capetian monarchs extended territorial control, reasserted authority over rebellious nobles, and established administrative institutions that strengthened royal influence. In the Holy Roman Empire, emperors balanced authority with that of powerful territorial princes, bishops, and urban centers, creating a decentralized yet hierarchical political structure that characterized much of Central Europe. These developments reflect the interplay of centralization, local autonomy, and institutional innovation during the High to Late Middle Ages transition. Trade, commerce, and economic exchange expanded despite demographic and environmental stress. Long-distance trade continued to link Northern Europe with the Mediterranean and the Near East. Italian city-states, including Venice, Genoa, and Pisa, maintained maritime dominance, while northern merchants organized through the Hanseatic League to facilitate trade in the North and Baltic Seas. The circulation of coinage increased, supporting urban commerce, taxation, and credit mechanisms. Markets, fairs, and specialized production centers reinforced economic interdependence between rural and urban populations. Agricultural surpluses, resource management, and transport infrastructure supported the integration of regional economies, contributing to resilience in the face of localized crises. The period from 1350 to 1450 represents a transformative era in medieval European history, defined by widespread political conflict, economic disruption, demographic decline, and the gradual decline of feudal structures. Europe had emerged from the demographic crises of the mid-14th century, particularly the Black Death, 1347 to 1351, which had reduced the population by approximately one-third, with regional variations ranging from 25% to 50% mortality in affected areas. The consequences of this demographic collapse were profound, reshaping labor relations, economic production, social hierarchies, and political structures. Feudal obligations were increasingly undermined by the scarcity of labor, while urban centers gained new influence through trade, crafts, and economic flexibility. The period also saw the intensification of large-scale warfare, particularly the Hundred Years' War, 1337 to 1453, between England and France, which played a critical role in redefining military organization, political authority, and state formation. The demographic collapse initiated structural changes in European society. The shortage of agricultural labor after the Black Death increased bargaining power for peasants and rural workers. In many regions, lords faced declining revenue from rents, labor obligations, and feudal dues. In response, attempts were made to impose labor restrictions and wage controls, as exemplified by the English Statute of Laborers, 1351, which sought to fix wages and bind workers to their manners. These measures often provoked resistance, including localized revolts such as the Peasants' Revolt in England, 1381, reflecting broader social tension across Western Europe. The demographic contraction also resulted in abandoned farmland, decreased grain production, and shifts in settlement patterns. Urban centers, benefiting from surplus labor, increased their economic influence, attracting artisans, merchants, and professionals who gained leverage in local governance and trade regulation. The political landscape of Europe during this century was shaped by the interplay of monarchy, regional nobility, and emerging administrative structures. In France, the Capetian dynasty continued under the Valois line, consolidating territorial authority despite internal disputes and the ongoing conflict with England. French kings increasingly relied on taxation, bureaucratic administration, and professional armies rather than feudal levies alone. Similarly, the English monarchy under the Plantagenets sought to maintain control over both domestic governance and continental territories, particularly Gascony and other holdings in France, which became the primary theaters of the Hundred Years' War. Centralization of authority was further reinforced in kingdoms such as Castile, Aragon, and Portugal, where monarchs implemented fiscal reforms, legal codification, and centralized military organization. The 100 Years' War significantly influenced political and military developments during this period. The conflict originated in disputes over succession to the French throne and territorial claims in Normandy, Aquitaine, and Flanders. Warfare involved both conventional armies and mercenary forces, with the participation of knights, archers, infantry, and increasingly professionalized units. Tactical innovations and military technology played a major role in transforming European warfare. The English longbow, deployed effectively at battles such as Cressy, 1346, Poitiers, 1356, and Agincourt, 1415, demonstrated the effectiveness of ranged infantry against heavily armored cavalry. Siege warfare continued to evolve, with the use of early gunpowder artillery, cannons, and other siege engines gradually altering fortification design and battlefield strategy. The financial and logistical demands of prolonged warfare fostered centralized administration and taxation systems, which strengthened royal authority relative to feudal lords while contributing to the decline of traditional feudal obligations. Feudalism as a political and social system continued to erode under economic, demographic, and military pressures. The scarcity of labor and increased mobility allowed peasants to negotiate higher wages, purchase freedom from servitude, or relocate to towns. Lords faced constraints in enforcing customary obligations and maintaining revenue from rural estates. This erosion of feudal labor arrangements was accompanied by the growth of cash-based economies, urban markets, and trade networks, which provided alternatives to traditional feudal dependence. In addition, the consolidation of monarchical power reduced the military and administrative independence of regional nobility, diminishing their capacity to operate as autonomous feudal authorities and contributing to the gradual emergence of centralized states. Urbanization and trade continued to expand, further transforming European economic and social structures. Italian city-states, including Venice, Genoa, and Florence, consolidated mercantile dominance in the Mediterranean, linking European markets to those of the Eastern Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Near East. The development of banking institutions, credit networks, and investment mechanisms facilitated the financing of trade, military campaigns, and urban infrastructure. In Northern Europe, the Hanseatic League maintained commercial coordination among towns along the North and Baltic Seas, standardizing trade regulations, protecting merchant interests, and enabling long-distance economic exchange. These economic developments supported the growth of urban populations, contributed to social mobility, and enhanced the influence of non-noble elites, including merchants, artisans, and financiers. Religious institutions continued to play a central role in European society, though the authority of the Church faced both internal and external challenges. The Avignon Papacy, 1309 to 1377, during which the papal court was based in Avignon, France, reflected tensions between spiritual authority and secular influence, particularly the relationship between the papacy and the French monarchy. The subsequent Western Schism, 1378 to 1417, in which rival claimants to the papacy emerged, heretical movements, including the Lollards in England and the Hussites in Bohemia, emerged during this period, challenging clerical authority and promoting reform, signaling the increasing tension between established church structures and evolving social and intellectual currents. The cultural and intellectual landscape of Europe during this century reflected both continuity and transformation. Universities, cathedral schools, and monastic centers continued to produce scholars, clerics, and administrators trained in theology, law, medicine, and philosophy. Scholastic methods of reasoning, influenced by figures such as Thomas Aquinas and Duns Scotus, persisted in academic discourse, emphasizing logic, dialectical reasoning, and the reconciliation of faith and reason. Vernacular literature flourished, including epic poetry, chronicles, and devotional texts, reflecting broader literacy and the emergence of regional linguistic identity. Artistic production, including manuscript illumination, sculpture, and Gothic architecture, continued to develop, with cathedrals, chapels, and civic structures serving as centers for religious, social, and cultural expression. The social consequences of war and demographic change were pronounced. Urban labor shortages and increased bargaining power of workers altered traditional economic hierarchies. Rural communities, facing reduced populations, negotiated improved terms with lords, leading to greater autonomy, lease-based tenure, and, in some cases, outright freedom from servitude. Recurrent military campaigns disrupted trade, agriculture, and settlement, but also stimulated technological innovation in weaponry, fortification, and logistics. The combination of population recovery, economic adaptation, and evolving governance systems gradually reshaped the political and social framework of Europe, facilitating the decline of feudalism and the emergence of centralized states. The military organization underwent a significant transformation as well. Feudal levies continued to contribute to armies, but increasingly professional soldiers, mercenaries, and standing forces supplemented or replaced traditional obligations. Gunpowder technology, introduced from Asia, began to appear in European warfare, contributing to the development of cannons, handguns, and early artillery. Fortifications adapted in response to these technological advances, with thicker walls, angled bastions, and concentric designs implemented to withstand bombardment. These changes shifted the balance of military power from mounted feudal cavalry to combined arms forces, integrating infantry, ranged units, and artillery in new tactical formations. Logistics, supply, and centralized command became increasingly critical to the conduct of prolonged campaigns, enhancing the role of monarchs and centralized authority in military affairs. Political developments were also marked by evolving administrative structures. In England, the Crown expanded the use of royal courts, standardized legal procedures, and implemented taxation to fund military campaigns. Parliament developed as a consultative and representative institution, incorporating both nobility and commoners in the oversight of taxation and legal matters. In France, the Valois monarchy extended royal control over territories, suppressed regional noble autonomy, and reinforced centralized judicial and fiscal administration. In the Iberian kingdoms, including Castile, Aragon, and Portugal, monarchs consolidated power, coordinated military campaigns such as the ongoing Reconquista, and administered law and taxation through bureaucratic structures. The Holy Roman Empire maintained a decentralized system, with emperors balancing authority against powerful princes, urban centers, and ecclesiastical authorities, preserving imperial oversight without fully centralizing governance. Economic transformations were further accelerated by demographic and social pressures. The shortage of labor increased wages and encouraged technological innovation in agriculture, including water mills, windmills, and improved plowing techniques. Urban economies benefited from rising demand for goods, the growth of markets and fairs, and the establishment of craft and merchant guilds. Trade routes expanded across the Mediterranean, the North Sea, and the Baltic, linking local economies to broader commercial networks. Financial innovations, including bills of exchange, letters of credit, and early banking practices, facilitated long-distance trade and allowed rulers to finance military campaigns, urban infrastructure, and bureaucratic institutions. The integration of economic, social, and political networks contributed to the resilience and adaptability of European societies despite widespread disruption. Cultural and intellectual life reflected the convergence of continuity and change. Gothic architecture continued to evolve, with cathedrals, abbeys, and civic structures demonstrating technical innovation and artistic refinement. Scholastic methods persisted in universities, while vernacular literature and poetry expanded, reflecting regional identities and urban literacy. Scientific inquiry, although limited in scope compared to later periods, continued within monastic, cathedral, and university settings, drawing on classical texts preserved from antiquity and adapted through medieval commentary. Artistic production integrated religious, civic, and intellectual themes, reflecting both the continuity of medieval traditions and the evolving complexity of European society during the century. The combined effects of demographic collapse, economic change, political consolidation, military innovation, and social transformation gradually weakened the traditional feudal framework. Lords retained local authority, but the interdependence of rural labor, urban production, and centralized governance shifted power toward monarchs, emerging bureaucracies, and urban elites. Feudal obligations became less rigid, labor mobility increased, and urban economic influence expanded. These structural shifts prepared the foundation for the emergence of early modern states, centralized military and administrative authority, and the broader social, economic, and cultural transformations that would characterize Europe in the 15th and 16th centuries. Religion was central to the organization, governance, and intellectual life of medieval Europe, with the Catholic Church serving as the primary institution mediating both spiritual and temporal authority. From the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD through the end of the medieval period around 1500, the Church exerted influence over virtually every aspect of European society, establishing a hierarchical structure that extended from the papacy in Rome to local parish clergy and monastic communities. Its authority encompassed spiritual guidance, moral regulation, legal oversight, education, and cultural production, making it a key actor in political, social, and intellectual developments across the continent. The papacy emerged as the central institution of ecclesiastical authority in Western Europe. Bishops and archbishops were responsible for regional governance, while the Pope claimed ultimate spiritual authority as successor to St. Peter. Papal power expanded beyond purely religious functions, influencing political affairs through diplomatic engagement. Notable examples include the investiture controversy, 11th to 12th centuries, which pitted the Holy Roman Emperors against successive popes over the appointment of bishops, and later disputes in England and France regarding taxation of the clergy and the independence of church courts. These conflicts shaped the development of both secular governance and ecclesiastical authority, leading to codified agreements, such as the Concordat of Worms, 1122, which partially resolved investiture disputes by delineating the respective powers of emperor and pope. Heresy and doctrinal dissent were persistent concerns for the Church. Movements challenging orthodoxy, clerical authority, or liturgical practices appeared throughout the medieval period, prompting the development of mechanisms for detection, adjudication, and suppression. Early heretical groups, such as the Cathars in southern France and the Waldensians in northern Italy, promoted alternative interpretations of Christian doctrine, emphasizing asceticism, lay preaching, and rejection of institutional authority. The Church responded with inquisitorial procedures, including the medieval Inquisition, established in the 12th and 13th centuries, to investigate, prosecute, and suppress heretical beliefs. Papal bulls, inquisitors, and ecclesiastical tribunals coordinated the enforcement of orthodoxy, demonstrating the centrality of doctrinal conformity to church authority. The East-West Schism of 1054 formalized the division between the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church. Doctrinal disputes, including the Filioque Clause, ecclesiastical jurisdiction, and liturgical practice, combined with political and cultural tensions between the Latin West and the Byzantine East. The schism resulted in the permanent separation of the Western Church, under the Pope in Rome, from the Eastern Church, under the Patriarch of Constantinople. Though limited contact and occasional collaboration persisted. This division influenced subsequent diplomatic, military, and cultural interactions between Western and Eastern Europe, shaping ecclesiastical policy and reinforcing the authority of regional patriarchates and monarchical patrons. The Crusades, beginning in the late 11th century, exemplified the intersection of religious authority, political power, and military enterprise. Papal calls to crusade mobilized European monarchs, nobility, and commoners to undertake military campaigns in the Holy Land, the Iberian Peninsula, and the Baltic region. Crusading activity served both religious and political purposes, consolidating papal authority, promoting the spread of Christianity, and providing opportunities for territorial expansion. The logistical and financial demands of these campaigns stimulated administrative and fiscal innovation among monarchies and ecclesiastical institutions, while contact with Byzantine and Islamic societies facilitated the transmission of knowledge, goods, and technology. Religious institutions also contributed to education and intellectual development. Cathedral schools and emerging universities trained clergy and lay administrators, emphasizing theology, canon law, philosophy, and the liberal arts. Scholasticism, which developed during the 12th and 13th centuries, sought to reconcile faith and reason, drawing on the works of Aristotle, Augustine, and other classical and patristic sources. Notable scholars, including Anselm of Canterbury, Peter Abelard, Thomas Aquinas, and Bonaventure, advanced systematic methods of theological and philosophical inquiry. Monastic and ecclesiastical centers preserved classical texts, translated works from Arabic and Greek, and disseminated knowledge through manuscript copying, lecture, and debate, laying the foundation for intellectual developments in the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Pilgrimage and devotional practice were integral components of religious life. Pilgrimage sites such as Santiago de Compostela, Canterbury, and Rome attracted large numbers of pilgrims, creating networks of travel, commerce, and cultural exchange. Relics, shrines, and liturgical observances structured both urban and rural religious experience. Lay participation in religious guilds, confraternities, and charitable organizations provided opportunities for social cohesion, communal identity, and engagement with ecclesiastical authority. Festivals, processions, and sacramental observance reinforced the Church's central role in regulating daily life, moral behavior, and community relations. The administration of religious life was reinforced by canon law, papal decrees, and ecclesiastical courts. The codification of canon law through collections such as the Decretals of Gregory IX, 1234, provided comprehensive guidance for clerical conduct, liturgical regulation, and the resolution of disputes. Ecclesiastical courts adjudicated matters ranging from clerical misconduct to disputes over marriage, inheritance, and moral transgressions, often intersecting with secular judicial systems. The enforcement of excommunication, interdict, and penance reinforced hierarchical authority, while simultaneously providing mechanisms for the resolution of conflict and the maintenance of social order. The influence of religious institutions extended into art, architecture, and literature. Gothic and Romanesque cathedrals, monastic churches, and chapels reflected technological innovation, artistic skill, and doctrinal symbolism. Illuminated manuscripts, biblical commentaries, and theological treatises facilitated the transmission of knowledge and religious instruction. Music, including Gregorian chant and the development of polyphony, structured liturgical practice and enriched cultural life. These forms of cultural production, while primarily serving religious purposes, also contributed to broader intellectual, technical, and artistic developments across Europe. The later medieval period witnessed increasing challenges to church authority. The Avignon Papacy, 1309 to 1377, and the Western Schism, 1378 to 1417, undermined papal prestige, revealing the vulnerabilities of centralized ecclesiastical authority. Concurrently, heretical movements, calls for reform, and popular dissent highlighted the limitations of institutional control. Figures such as John Wycliffe in England and Jan Hus in Bohemia criticized clerical corruption, doctrinal practices, and the accumulation of wealth, advocating for reform in both theology and ecclesiastical governance. These movements were met with condemnation, trial, and execution by church authorities, yet they signaled emerging tensions between spiritual authority, lay belief, and intellectual inquiry that would persist into the early modern period. In addition to doctrinal enforcement, the Church engaged in the regulation of morality, social behavior, and ethical norms. Ecclesiastical courts addressed offenses such as heresy, adultery, usury, and blasphemy, providing a framework for social regulation that complemented secular law. Confessional practices, penance, and sacramental observance reinforced moral accountability, while preaching and pastoral care aimed to guide lay behavior and maintain social cohesion. The Church's moral and judicial authority intertwined with political and economic structures, creating a comprehensive system of governance that shaped medieval European society across multiple dimensions. Between 900 and 1500 AD, medieval Europe experienced significant cultural, scientific, and artistic developments that shaped intellectual, technical, and aesthetic life. These developments were closely intertwined with the social, political, and religious structures established during the early and high Middle Ages, reflecting both continuity from the past and adaptation to changing conditions, including demographic expansion, urban growth, trade networks, and the increasing influence of centralized monarchies. Educational institutions, monastic centers, universities, and courts acted as repositories and transmitters of knowledge, while artistic production, literature, and scientific inquiry reflected evolving European engagement with classical texts, Arabic scholarship, and local innovation. Education in medieval Europe was largely structured by ecclesiastical institutions. Cathedral schools, monastic schools, and later universities served as centers of learning. Cathedral schools, initially intended to educate clergy, developed in cities such as Chartres, Paris, and Canterbury, providing instruction in the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Monastic schools contributed to literacy, manuscript production, and intellectual continuity, preserving classical and biblical texts through systematic copying. By the 12th century, universities emerged as distinct institutions with formal curricula, faculties, and degrees. Bologna specialized in law, Paris in theology, and Oxford in liberal arts and theology. These institutions codified intellectual disciplines, trained administrators and clergy, and facilitated scholarly exchange across Europe. Scholasticism dominated intellectual life, emphasizing the use of reason and dialectical methods to understand and reconcile theology, philosophy, and natural knowledge. Figures such as Peter Abelard, Thomas Aquinas, Duns Scotus, and William of Ockham contributed to the development of systematic logic, metaphysics, and ethical theory. Scholastic methods relied on structured debate, commentary on authoritative texts, and synthesis of disparate sources, including works of Aristotle translated from Arabic into Latin. Arabic and Greek scientific and philosophical texts, introduced through translation centers in Toledo, Sicily, and southern Italy, influenced medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy. These texts, along with the recovery of classical Roman works, provided a framework for understanding natural phenomena, legal principles, and human conduct. Scientific inquiry during the period focused on both theoretical and practical applications. Astronomy and timekeeping were critical for both religious observance and agricultural management, leading to the development of instruments such as astrolabes, quadrants, and mechanical clocks. Mathematics advanced through the adoption of Arabic numerals, the zero, and arithmetic operations, facilitating commerce, accounting, and engineering. Medicine was informed by classical texts, including Galen and Hippocrates, as well as Arabic contributions such as those of Avicenna, leading to the establishment of medical faculties in universities, including Salerno and Montpellier. Practical knowledge in hydraulics, architecture, and metallurgy supported urban development, fortification construction, and military technology. The arts during this period reflected both religious and secular concerns, demonstrating technical skill, aesthetic innovation, and social significance. Romanesque architecture, dominant from the 10th to the early 12th centuries, employed massive stone walls, rounded arches, barrel vaults, and sculptural decoration, as seen in structures such as St. Sernin in Toulouse and Speyer Cathedral in Germany. The Romanesque style emphasized solidity, geometric clarity, and functional design for both religious worship and pilgrimage accommodation. By the 12th century, the Gothic style emerged, first in the Île-de-France region, with innovations including pointed arches, ribbed vaulting, flying buttresses, and large stained glass windows. Cathedrals such as Chartres, Amiens, and Notre Dame de Paris exemplified this style, integrating structural engineering with iconographic and didactic programs, conveying biblical narratives, moral instruction, and civic prestige. Sculpture and relief work became increasingly sophisticated, with figurative programs integrated into portal decoration, capitals, and cloister reliefs. Themes included biblical narratives, saints' lives, moral allegories, and the representation of rulers and donors. Manuscript illumination remained central to intellectual and religious life, with texts produced in scriptoria across monastic and urban centers. Illuminated codices, including liturgical books, psalters, and Bibles, displayed intricate ornamentation, gold leaf, and painted miniatures, reflecting regional styles in France, England, Germany, and the Low Countries. These visual forms served both devotional and educational functions, enhancing comprehension of religious narratives and demonstrating the wealth and cultural authority of patrons. Music developed both liturgically and secularly. Gregorian chant dominated ecclesiastical practice, with modal systems and notation codified in manuscripts. Polyphony expanded during the 12th and 13th centuries, particularly in the Notre Dame School in Paris, incorporating organum, motets, and secular chansons. Composers such as Léonin and Pirotin established formal structures for multi-voice compositions, which influenced both sacred and secular musical practice. Instruments, including the organ, lute, harp, and fiddle, supported performance in courts, towns, and religious institutions. Music facilitated liturgical observance, communal identity, and courtly expression, reflecting both religious devotion and cultural sophistication. Literature evolved alongside linguistic, social, and intellectual developments. Latin remained the primary language of scholarship and ecclesiastical writing, but vernacular languages gained prominence for poetry, chronicles, and narrative literature. In France, the chansons de geste, such as the Song of Roland, celebrated heroic deeds, feudal loyalty, and martial valor. In Italy, Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, 1308 to 1321, integrated classical, theological, and vernacular traditions, providing a framework for literary, philosophical, and moral discourse. Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, late 14th century, in England reflected social stratification, urban life, and narrative innovation. Literature functioned both as entertainment and as a vehicle for moral and cultural instruction, bridging elite and popular culture. Education and literary production were complemented by developments in visual communication and representation. Cartography advanced through the compilation of Portolan charts, mappamundi, and regional maps, reflecting increased geographic knowledge derived from travel, trade, and crusading expeditions. Architectural drawings, plans, and measurements supported cathedral construction, fortifications, and urban planning. Technical treatises on mechanics, astronomy, and agriculture disseminated practical knowledge for scholars, artisans, and administrators, contributing to both intellectual continuity and technological innovation. These forms of knowledge dissemination allowed European societies to integrate practical expertise, religious observance, and intellectual inquiry into coherent frameworks of cultural production. Urbanization played a significant role in cultural development. Towns became centers of trade, craft specialization, and education. Guilds regulated production standards, apprenticeship training, and collective economic activity, shaping urban economies and social structures. Civic architecture, including town halls, marketplaces, and fortifications, reflected both functional requirements and the expression of communal identity. Public ceremonies, festivals, and processions reinforced civic cohesion and cultural values. The growth of urban centers facilitated the circulation of ideas, the patronage of arts, and the development of administrative institutions, linking cultural innovation to economic and political structures. Scientific, cultural, and artistic developments were also influenced by external contacts. Interaction with the Byzantine Empire, Islamic Spain, North Africa, and the Eastern Mediterranean introduced advanced knowledge in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering. Translation movements in Toledo, Sicily, and southern Italy brought Greek, Arabic, and Jewish scholarship into Latin Europe. These sources enriched intellectual discourse, allowing European scholars to synthesize classical, Arabic, and local knowledge. The introduction of papermaking techniques from the Islamic world in the 13th century contributed to manuscript production, literacy, and the dissemination of both scholarly and practical texts. Technological innovation intersected with both military and economic activity. The widespread adoption of the heavy plow, water, and windmills, mechanical clocks, and improved shipbuilding techniques supported agricultural efficiency, urbanization, and maritime trade. Innovations in metallurgy, including the production of wrought iron and the refinement of casting techniques, facilitated weaponry, construction, and infrastructure projects. Military architecture adapted to these technological advances, with thicker walls, angled bastions, and concentric fortifications constructed in response to the introduction of gunpowder artillery in the 14th century. Such technological integration demonstrates the interplay between practical necessity, knowledge transfer, and cultural adaptation in medieval European society. The period also witnessed the development of vernacular scientific and instructional literature. Works on arithmetic, astronomy, medicine, and natural history were increasingly composed in regional languages, reflecting both the expansion of literacy and the demand for practical knowledge among urban, mercantile, and artisan populations. Technical manuals addressed agricultural techniques, mechanical devices, and medical treatments, while encyclopedic compilations synthesized knowledge from classical, Islamic, and indigenous sources. These texts facilitated both the transmission of existing knowledge and the generation of new insights, integrating observation, theory, and practical application. Artistic and scientific production was intertwined with religious, political, and social institutions. Patronage from monarchs, urban elites, bishops, and monastic orders directed resources toward cathedrals, palaces, libraries, and educational institutions. Commissions supported manuscript illumination, frescoes, sculpture, architectural innovation, and mechanical devices. Institutional and private patronage facilitated cultural continuity, technical advancement, and the codification of intellectual traditions. The integration of these developments reinforced social hierarchy, political authority, and religious observance while promoting knowledge accumulation across generations. By the late 15th century, the cumulative effect of cultural, scientific, and artistic developments in Europe laid the groundwork for broader transformation. The growth of literacy, the emergence of universities, the synthesis of classical and Arabic knowledge, and technical innovations in agriculture, architecture, and industry established the intellectual and material conditions necessary for the Renaissance. Urbanization, the circulation of ideas, and the influence of both ecclesiastical and secular patronage contributed to the consolidation of cultural networks that extended across Western Europe. Scientific inquiry, artistic production, and literary expression reflected the integration of multiple traditions, demonstrating both continuity with medieval institutions in preparation for early modern expansion and experimentation. The period from 1400 to 1500 marks a critical transition in European history, bridging the developments of the late medieval period with the intellectual, cultural, and political transformations that defined the early Renaissance. By the 15th century, Europe was characterized by urban expansion, economic growth, the consolidation of centralized monarchies, and increasing engagement with classical knowledge, laying the groundwork for a systematic revival of art, literature, and scientific inquiry. These developments occurred against the backdrop of demographic recovery following the Black Death, the political stabilization of emerging nation-states, and increased interaction with the Mediterranean and broader world through trade and exploration. Demographically, Europe experienced a gradual recovery from the population losses of the mid-14th century. By the early 15th century, population density in many regions approached pre-plague levels, though recovery was uneven geographically. Agricultural expansion resumed in formerly abandoned lands, and innovations in crop rotation, plow design, and land management enhanced productivity. Labor shortages persisted in some areas, maintaining elevated wages and increased mobility for peasants and urban workers. The demographic resurgence facilitated the growth of towns and cities, supported regional markets, and contributed to the consolidation of political and economic authority in centralized monarchies. Urban centers became focal points for commerce, administration, and cultural activity, serving as hubs of knowledge circulation, artistic patronage, and institutional development. Politically, the consolidation of power by monarchs was a defining feature of the 15th century. In France, the Valois monarchy, emerging from the protracted conflict of the Hundred Years' War, strengthened royal authority, implemented administrative reforms, and established a standing army. England, recovering from internal conflicts such as the Wars of the Roses, 1455 to 1487, centralized governance under the Tudor monarchy and restructuring fiscal, judicial, and military administration. In the Iberian Peninsula, the unification of Castile and Aragon under Ferdinand and Isabella advanced centralized control, coordinated military campaigns in the final stages of the Reconquista, and implemented systematic governance, taxation, and legal codification. Other European polities, including the Italian city-states, the Holy Roman Empire, and the kingdoms of Scandinavia, also engaged in processes of administrative centralization, legal standardization, and territorial consolidation, contributing to the emergence of early modern state structures. Economically, trade networks expanded across Europe, integrating local, regional, and long-distance commerce. Italian city-states, including Venice, Florence, and Genoa, dominated Mediterranean trade, connecting European markets to the Levant, North Africa, and Asia through commercial intermediaries. Northern European towns, coordinated through the Hanseatic League, facilitated trade across the North and Baltic Seas, specializing in commodities such as grain, timber, furs, and textiles. Innovations in banking, credit, and investment, particularly in Florence, Genoa, and Bruges, supported commercial expansion, state finance, and urban development. The availability of capital and the accumulation of wealth enabled patronage of artistic, intellectual, and architectural projects, stimulating the revival of classical forms and the development of new aesthetic standards. Intellectual life during the 15th century reflected the revival of classical learning, often referred to as humanism. Humanist scholars, primarily in Italy but increasingly throughout Western Europe, emphasized the study of Latin and Greek texts, philology, history, and moral philosophy. Figures such as Francesco Petrarca, Petrarch, Lorenzo Valla, Poggio Bracciolini, and Leonardo Bruni collected, copied, and analyzed classical manuscripts, seeking to recover authentic texts, correct errors introduced through medieval copying, and apply critical methods to historical and literary studies. Humanist curricula integrated grammar, rhetoric, poetry, history, and ethics, emphasizing the practical application of knowledge to civic life and personal development. Education was increasingly oriented toward urban elites, administrators, and professional classes, reflecting the social and economic changes of the period. Artistic developments during the 15th century reflected both continuity with Gothic traditions and the introduction of classical principles. In Italy, early Renaissance painting incorporated linear perspective, proportion, and naturalistic representation, with artists such as Filippo Brunelleschi, Masaccio, Fra Angelico, and Piero della Francesca demonstrating mathematical precision, spatial depth, and human anatomy. Architectural innovations integrated classical elements, including columns, pilasters, and domes, exemplified by projects such as Brunelleschi's dome for the Florence Cathedral and urban palazzi in Florence and Venice. Sculpture adopted classical motifs, realism, and attention to human form, as seen in the work of Donatello and Ghiberti, while integrating narrative and religious content. These artistic developments were supported by patronage from city-states, wealthy merchants, and ecclesiastical authorities, linking cultural production to economic and political structures. Literature and historiography also evolved during this period. Humanist writers produced historical works, moral treatises, and literary compositions grounded in classical models. In addition to Petrarch and Bruni, figures such as Lorenzo de' Medici and Leon Battista Alberti promoted education, civic engagement, and cultural patronage, fostering the dissemination of humanist ideals. Vernacular literature gained prominence alongside Latin scholarship, with works in Italian, English, French, and other European languages contributing to the standardization of language, literary forms, and public discourse. Literature reflected social, political, and ethical concerns, providing both instruction and entertainment while promoting critical engagement with moral and civic issues. Scientific inquiry advanced through both the recovery of classical knowledge and empirical observation. Astronomy benefited from translations of Ptolemy, Arab scholars, and commentaries on planetary motion, leading to improved methods of observation and computation. Mathematics, including algebra, geometry, and arithmetic, was increasingly applied to commerce, engineering, and surveying. Medicine integrated classical texts, Arab medical treatises, and clinical observation, contributing to the foundation of professional medical practice in universities and urban hospitals. Technical innovations in mechanics, engineering, and navigation facilitated construction, water management, and maritime exploration. These scientific developments, though still limited in scope relative to later periods, provided the intellectual and practical foundation for the systematic study of natural phenomena in the Renaissance. Urbanization, commerce, and cultural networks fostered the growth of printing technology. By the late 15th century, Johannes Gutenberg's movable type press, circa 1450, enabled the mass production of books, facilitating the dissemination of knowledge, literacy, and scholarly exchange. Printed texts allowed humanist, religious, and scientific works to circulate more widely, accelerating educational and intellectual development across Europe. The printing revolution also enhanced access to classical and contemporary texts, promoting critical engagement with established authorities and encouraging standardized orthography, textual accuracy, and broader participation in intellectual discourse. Exploration and engagement with distant regions began during this century, linking Europe to the wider world and providing material and intellectual stimulus for further development. Portuguese navigators, supported by maritime schools and patronage from Prince Henry the Navigator, explored the West African coast, establishing trade routes and acquiring knowledge of navigation, cartography, and shipbuilding. Simultaneously, Italian merchants and explorers, particularly from Genoa and Venice, expanded trade and diplomatic connections with the Eastern Mediterranean, the Levant, and the Black Sea. These activities contributed to the accumulation of wealth, the exchange of knowledge, and the integration of European economies into broader Afro-Eurasian networks, laying the groundwork for the Age of Discovery in the 16th century. Religious life continued to influence intellectual, cultural, and civic activity, though challenges to church authority persisted. The consolidation of centralized monarchies often entailed the regulation of ecclesiastical institutions, taxation, and judicial authority. Humanist scholars and civic leaders increasingly promoted education and moral instruction within urban and courtly contexts, supplementing traditional church-controlled curricula. Simultaneously, calls for reform and criticism of clerical excess, such as those articulated by figures including Girolamo Savonarola in Florence, reflected the intersection of religious, political, and cultural concerns. The combination of ecclesiastical oversight, humanist scholarship, and civic engagement shaped patterns of learning, governance, and cultural production, integrating religious frameworks with secular and intellectual activity. Economic developments underpinned cultural and intellectual growth. Accumulated wealth from commerce, trade, and banking supported urban infrastructure, public buildings, and private patronage of art and scholarship. Merchant elites, guilds, and civic institutions funded schools, libraries, and artistic commissions, linking economic success with cultural authority. Agricultural productivity improvements and technological innovations, including watermills, windmills, and enhanced plow techniques, sustained urban populations and facilitated economic specialization. The integration of financial, commercial, and technological resources created conditions conducive to sustained intellectual and artistic activity, linking economic infrastructure with cultural output. By the end of the 15th century, the cumulative effect of urbanization, economic growth, political centralization, humanist scholarship, artistic innovation, and technological development established the conditions for the full flowering of the Renaissance. Italian city-states served as laboratories for cultural experimentation, integrating classical models with contemporary social, political, and religious contexts. Northern European centers, including Bruges, Ghent, and Paris, participated in artistic, scientific, and educational developments, reflecting the diffusion of Renaissance ideas beyond Italy. The integration of intellectual inquiry, material resources, and political stability provided a framework for systematic exploration of nature, human society, and cultural expression, marking the transition from medieval structures to early modern Europe. The medieval period, spanning approximately 476 to 1500 AD, left enduring effects on European political, social, economic, intellectual, and cultural structures. The processes and institutions developed over nearly a millennium formed the foundation for early modern Europe, influencing governance, law, religious organization, education, trade, urban life, architecture, literature, and scientific inquiry. By examining these developments, it becomes evident how medieval continuity, crisis, and adaptation shaped subsequent European society. Politically, the legacy of medieval governance is evident in the consolidation of centralized monarchies, administrative structures, and legal systems. Early medieval Europe was fragmented into small, localized lordships, relying on feudal obligations for military and economic organization. Over centuries, rulers gradually consolidated authority, reducing the autonomy of local lords while integrating judicial, fiscal, and military functions under centralized control. The Capetian kings of France, the Tudor monarchs of England, and the Iberian rulers of Castile and Aragon exemplify these processes, creating administrative bureaucracies, codifying laws, and establishing mechanisms for taxation, conscription, and enforcement of royal edicts. The evolution of representative institutions, such as the English Parliament and the French Estates General, reflects medieval experimentation with consultation, accountability, and negotiation between rulers and subjects. These political structures, though embryonic, provided models for early modern state formation and legal sovereignty. Feudalism, while declining by the late medieval period, shaped enduring social hierarchies and landholding patterns. Land tenure and obligations established in the feudal system created structured relationships between lords, vassals, and peasants, regulating labor, defense, and property rights. Even as labor mobility increased following population crises such as the Black Death, the influence of feudal social norms persisted in hierarchical organization, obligations, and expectations of service. Manorial estates continued to function as centers of agricultural production, social organization, and local governance, sustaining rural economies and shaping settlement patterns that persisted into the early modern era. Legal systems developed during the medieval period laid the groundwork for modern jurisprudence. Canon law, codified in collections such as the Decretum of Gratian and the Decretals of Gregory IX, provided comprehensive frameworks for ecclesiastical, moral, and social regulation. Secular law evolved concurrently, incorporating Roman legal principles, customary codes, and royal decrees. The interaction between church courts and secular authorities established precedents for jurisdictional authority, appeals, and procedural regulation. Municipal charters and guild regulations codified local governance, market control, and civic rights, contributing to the development of urban legal systems. These codifications ensured continuity of legal practice, institutional stability, and the capacity to adapt to changing political and social conditions. Religion left a profound and multifaceted legacy across Europe. The Catholic Church, as the central spiritual and institutional authority, shaped morality, education, law, and social organization. Monastic orders preserved knowledge, promoted literacy, and contributed to technological and agricultural innovation. Ecclesiastical structures influenced urban planning, charitable provision, and cultural production. The East-West Schism established enduring divisions in Christendom, while reform movements and heretical challenges set patterns for intellectual critique, doctrinal debate, and religious engagement. Church architecture, music, liturgy, and devotional practices contributed to enduring aesthetic, educational, and social frameworks that continued to shape European cultural identity beyond the medieval period. Educational and intellectual institutions developed during the Middle Ages formed the foundation of European scholarship. Monastic and cathedral schools preserved classical texts, trained clergy, and promoted literacy, while universities codified curricula, degrees, and scholarly networks. Scholasticism, emphasizing reasoned inquiry, systematic argumentation, and textual analysis, provided intellectual frameworks that influenced subsequent philosophy, theology, and science. The recovery and translation of classical texts, combined with contact with Arabic and Byzantine scholarship, expanded the scope of knowledge in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Humanist movements in the 15th century built upon these medieval foundations, demonstrating continuity in scholarly methods, textual criticism, and intellectual engagement, linking the Middle Ages to the Renaissance and early modern thought. Cultural and artistic achievements of the medieval period established long-lasting aesthetic and technical legacies. Romanesque and Gothic architecture introduced engineering techniques, spatial design, and iconographic programs that influenced Renaissance and early modern building practices. stained glass windows, sculptural programs, and illuminated manuscripts codified visual literacy, narrative communication, and symbolic representation. Musical innovation, including Gregorian chant and polyphony, structured religious practice and informed later compositional techniques. Literature in Latin and vernacular languages developed narrative conventions, ethical instruction, and historical recording, providing a textual corpus that continued to influence literary traditions. Artistic workshops, craft guilds, and urban centers institutionalized technical skill, aesthetic standards, and apprenticeship structures, ensuring continuity of craftsmanship and cultural knowledge. Scientific and technological advancements from the medieval period influenced early modern development. Innovations in agriculture, such as the heavy plow, three-field rotation, water and windmills, and mechanized grain processing, increased productivity and supported population growth. Mechanical devices, clocks, bridges, and fortifications reflected the practical application of engineering knowledge. Urban expansion and trade stimulated improvements in navigation, shipbuilding, and cartography, facilitating the European age of discovery. Medical knowledge, derived from classical, Islamic, and observational sources, informed the practice of physicians and hospitals. Mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy, institutionalized through universities and courts, provided the methodological and theoretical foundations for Renaissance science. Urbanization, economic expansion, and trade networks created enduring commercial and social structures. Medieval towns, guilds, and marketplaces established principles of regulation, quality control, and cooperative economic activity. Banking, credit systems, and commercial documentation developed in Italian city-states and Northern Europe created a financial infrastructure that persisted into the early modern era. Civic organizations, including municipal councils, charters, and public institutions, provided frameworks for governance, dispute resolution, and collective action. Urban culture facilitated social mobility, intellectual exchange, and the patronage of art and education, linking economic activity to cultural and intellectual development. Military and political institutions developed during the Middle Ages influenced the organization and conduct of warfare in subsequent periods. The introduction of professional armies, siege technology, fortification design, and administrative coordination of military resources reflected a transition from localized feudal levies to centralized state control. Weapon innovations, including longbows, crossbows, and early gunpowder artillery, reshaped military strategy, logistics, and defensive planning. The codification of laws of war, chivalric codes, and diplomatic norms established patterns for engagement that influenced early modern European politics and international relations. The integration of knowledge, technology, and cultural production into institutional structures facilitated continuity across disciplines. Monastic centers, universities, courts, and urban workshops acted as repositories and transmitters of intellectual and technical expertise. The combination of clerical and lay scholarship promoted systematic inquiry, textual preservation, and skill development. Patronage networks, encompassing monarchs, ecclesiastical authorities, and merchant elites, ensured the continuity of cultural investment, facilitating the transmission of ideas, technical skill, and artistic practice across generations. These institutional frameworks provided the structural stability necessary for the transition from medieval to early modern Europe. Exploration, trade, and cross-cultural contact extended the influence of medieval Europe beyond the continent. Mediterranean trade connected European states with the Byzantine Empire, North Africa, and the Levant, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and knowledge. Northern European trade, coordinated through networks such as the Hanseatic League, linked towns and regions across the North and Baltic Seas. Maritime expansion in the 15th century, particularly Portuguese exploration along the African coast, initiated the processes that would later culminate in the European Age of Discovery. These activities integrated economic, technological, and cultural developments, demonstrating the global dimension of medieval legacy. Social structures established during the medieval period persisted into the early modern era. Hierarchical organization, including distinctions between nobility, clergy, urban elites, and peasantry, provided the framework for political authority, economic relations, and cultural expression. Although social mobility increased due to urbanization, trade, and demographic shifts, medieval norms of obligation, patronage, and hierarchy continued to influence social interaction, governance, and civic organization. Gender roles, family structures, and inheritance practices established patterns that persisted in legal and social institutions beyond the medieval period. Religious structures maintained influence while adapting to changing conditions. While the authority of the Catholic Church declined relative to emerging secular states and humanist intellectual trends, ecclesiastical institutions continued to regulate moral behavior, education, and social welfare. The preservation of texts, establishment of schools and universities, and management of hospitals and charitable institutions ensured the continued impact of medieval religious frameworks on civic and intellectual life. Patterns of devotional practice, pilgrimage, and liturgical observance influenced cultural norms, community identity, and moral regulation in the early modern period. The integration of medieval legacies into economic, political, and intellectual life facilitated the transition to early modern Europe. Urbanization, administrative centralization, legal codification, and economic specialization provided the infrastructure for subsequent state development. Artistic, literary, and architectural achievements created aesthetic standards, technical knowledge, and cultural networks that informed Renaissance production. Scholarly institutions, translation of classical and Arabic texts, and the emergence of humanism prepared the intellectual environment for systematic scientific inquiry, philosophical development, and the exploration of humanist ethics. Technological innovations in agriculture, engineering, navigation, and military affairs established material conditions that enabled sustained growth, mobility, and experimentation. The cumulative impact of these developments illustrates the medieval period as a millennium of continuity, crisis, and transformation. Political consolidation, economic expansion, social structuring, religious authority, intellectual innovation, and cultural production interacted to produce complex systems that endured well beyond the medieval period. While certain practices and institutions evolved or declined, the structural, intellectual, and technological frameworks established during 476 to 1500 AD shaped the trajectory of European civilization, providing the basis for Renaissance achievement, early modern governance, scientific inquiry, and cultural expression.